So today's hair tutorial is going to be about relocking locks or tightening locks at the root after they have grown out for months. These locks have actually grown out for 4 months, and so usually I recommend locks being retightened every 2 months by the interlocking method at a regular pace. This client went double that time, so there's a little extra regrowth, which then at that point some of the hairs start crossing the parts into other locks, and so that results in the need to there's some pulling, I should say. It's a little more painful to get your locks retightened if you've had grow out for 4 months instead of 2. Now, if you are trying to get your locks retightened at the root more often than 2 months, either you should be doing the palm roll method or you shouldn't be doing the interlocking much more often than that. Like if you do it every month or every 2 weeks or something, sometimes it can cause thinning at the roots, so I don't really recommend that. So this is just, my process, and this video is made specifically for a barber who owns his own business and I've worked with for years. I used to have a chair in his shop and do braids and locks there as he did cuts. And of course, I always did his locks. And so his wife requested that I make a video showing how I did his locks because I've moved away and he really misses me working with his hair. So this is for his wife so that she can learn this method and hopefully manage his locks from here on out. So I hope it's also helpful for some of the rest of you as well. So these are all the tools you'll need. Clips, of course. I use the scalp oil, Dermasolve, and also tea tree mint oil, tea tree and mint scalp treatment, and Black Panther Strong edge control for really rogue hairs or just to get a little extra tightening and hold, and especially if you're styling and braids or twists with the locks. And then I use a latch hook and a 0.75 tiny crochet needle. So 0.75 millimeters, tiny. It's kind of a secret, not a secret tool, but an important tool to add to your latch hook. I don't recommend those micro lock needles, the dreadlock tools, or they're called dreadlock tools, that go back and forth for retightening. They're good for initial building of dreads, but not as good for retightening. So let's get to it. Let's get started on this client's hair. So we're going to get started, and actually I'm halfway through this client's head, so you can see before and after together. Below is after, and on the top is before, clearly. You can see all this grow out. It's about 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches of new growth up under the locks, so it's almost like a fro plus locks at this point. So it's been at least 4 months, and you're going to section out a row. So I do the rows in the circumference of the head, and you're going to go ahead and grab a rat tail comb or a comb with a nice kind of thin metal handle on it, and go ahead and section off. You're going to work kind of right down that part, the circumference part, with the tip of that comb. The rat tail part is what it's called. And go ahead and just kind of lift up the hairs that are crossing that part and separate them with your fingers so there's not as much pulling. You don't want to just rip that comb up. If you do that, it's going to break some of the hairs, and you don't want any breakage. So you're going to continue this all the way around the part and just kind of separate those hairs. You're basically resectioning the locks because it's grown out for so long. These little hairs the new growth has crossed over some of the parts and started to connect with other locks instead of the one it's supposed to be going into. So you're just basically sectioning out all of that new growth, almost like starting fresh locks in a way, as far as the sections go, but you should be able to follow and see the part pattern, to just follow the part line. It should still be visible when you kind of gently pull those locks apart to find that circumference row, or that circumference line around the head, the circumference of the head. And then you can see how long these hairs are that I'm kind of separating with my fingers. And you just, again, want to separate them carefully with your fingers so that you can feel the tension on the hairs as you separate them. It's still going to pull a bit for the client, but it's not going to rip out the hair or be damaging in any way. Whereas if you're just pulling up with that comb all the way, then you don't feel the tension as directly as you do with your fingers, so it can sometimes tear. So then you're just going to go ahead and clip that top section up, just so that those hairs that you have separated out stay out of the way. And then you're going to use the same comb to separate vertically out the in between the locks. And since I'm doing 2 lock twists as the style, I'm basically going to, and this is the edge control, the Black Panther Strong, just because this is an edge lock here. Because I'm doing the 2 lock twists, I'm going to basically be doing each of these in 2s. So you're going to go ahead and kind of roll it as I did at the root, and then you're doing a around the clock. It's called like north to south, east to west type of lock pattern, similar to what you use the little lock tool for, but I like to use a latch hook instead. Then you take your 0.75 crochet needle, and with all that, see that new growth that's just loose, you want to form a lock. So you're basically grabbing that with the tiny hook and poking it back into the lock. You're kind of making tiny, tiny little knots. This looks basically like, it looks like you're not doing anything, but you really are. And you want to make sure that it feels sturdy and strong in the core of the lock. And then just go ahead and, again, continue to kind of twist, just to encourage those hairs to stay in that twist pattern so that they're even all the way down, so you don't have a fat to thin type of lock, but you have an even lock all the way down. Now these locks actually are a little bit fat at the ends, but that was before I started working with this client's hair, so I'm trying to make the locks even from, of course, the point that I start working with it on. I can kind of usually tell where I've started versus where the last person left off, just because the lock is maintained a little bit differently by different locticians. So again, you're going to take a tiny bit of either mango lime lock gel, or you can use the Black Panther Strong Edge Control at just the very base. Push your needle in from right to left, hook the end and pull it through. Then push it from bottom to top, hook the end and pull it through, then go back right to left, and so on until you feel that root be nice and tight. Now you don't want it so tight that it's painful, because then it'll be pulling the hair. Again, it'll make a thinner root. You don't want the root to thin out. Then you're going to take your needle tool, your lock tool, your tiny crochet hook here, the 0.75 millimeter tool, and again, you're grabbing, you're pulling those ends up. You can kind of feel it with your fingers as you do it. You're twisting with your fingers as you do that, and you're just making that core of the lock nice and solid so that those hairs don't come back out. And then you want to get your crochet hook out of there, and again, just keep twisting a little bit with your fingers. You can also repair the ends, like if there are loose hairs on the ends of the lock or whatever, you can also repair those with that crochet hook. So you're going to just, again, palm roll back and forth just to make that lock nice and secure. Then you're going to grab the other one and twist. You're rolling it with your fingers to the right, both locks to the right, then you're twisting one over the top of the other towards the left, just like doing a Senegalese twist all the way down. So you twist right overlap, twist right, overlap all the way down to the end, then add a rubber band, a tiny little black rubber band or matching color to the end of that twist just to hold the twist. And when you take these, I also like to kind of roll the twist just to, again, keep the hair nice and even, just so that those lock twists are nice and even all the way down as well. Then you're going to go ahead and use the Dermasolve, and you can use both, the tea treatment, scalp treatment, and treat the scalp to make sure the scalp is nice and hydrated and moisturized. This is also going to feel really good on your head after having gotten all of these locks retwisted. So this is actually another client, and you can see that these locks, actually, I didn't start. They were maintained with one of those lock tool needles, and you can see a lot of breakage at the scalp. In fact, it's really hard to part a nice clean part because of the breakage. And in fact, the locks were breaking off. At least 5 of them had fallen out because they had been tightened too often and too tightly at the roots. And so I had to rebuild with that 0.75 millimeter tool. You can actually rebuild a lock, reattach a lock that's fallen out to the root hair. You just have to form a tiny, tiny little braid, then wrap the hairs around it, and then use that tool to kind of push the ends together into forming a lock. So another tip is you can do an apple cider vinegar and baking soda wash. You can see on the left before, right is after, of course, not after just washing, but after also retwisting. Now, this is with the palm roll method retwist. However, you can see that ACV rinse or wash really cleans out a lot of smoke. If a client has whatever they're smoking, whether it's weed or cigarettes or whatever, you can, if the smoke is really thickly built up in the locks, you can definitely darken the locks, the whole shade, just by really cleansing them well with an apple cider vinegar, baking soda soak. You want to add the baking soda because otherwise you don't want your hair to smell like vinegar. But the apple cider vinegar really works well for darkening locks that have been smoke filled, and also just for doing a nice deep cleanse and for resetting the scalp pH so that the client does not have dandruff. So this is actually the client who I'm doing this video for, and this is what the locks should look like when they're done if they're braided back. These are, of course, cornrow braided back locks after they're interlock retightened at the root. So yeah, make sure you moisturize the scalp, keep those locks healthy, don't let them thin out at the roots, and always style with a fresh style, either braids or 2-lock twists to just really hold the lock in place. Try to leave those braids or twists in for at least 2 weeks, if not maybe even up to 4 weeks or so, just to really let those locks set, the new growth really lock. So yeah, that's about it for this tutorial. I hope it's helpful to some of you, and for those of you who don't know why we don't say dreadlocks or dreads, or some people don't anyway, it's just a little bit frowned upon because dread is associated with threat or threatening, or kind of a negative connotation. So locks is just a little more woke term to use than dreadlocks. But anyway, that's a little side note. So here you go. Here's your little interlocking tutorial, and feel free to ask any questions, of course, in the comments.